He left her at the altar, and years later, he finds her as the judge of his divorce case with another woman. Hello, welcome, enjoy, subscribe, and activate notifications. The sun shone brightly that Saturday morning. The church was beautifully adorned with white flowers and gold ribbons. Guests trickled in, dressed in their finest attire. Jessica was in a room at the back of the church, adjusting her bridal gown. Her hands trembled slightly as she looked at herself in the mirror, barely believing the big day had finally arrived. Outside, Alex arrived with his groomsmen. He looked anxious, constantly adjusting his tie and running his hands through his hair. His friends tried to calm him, saying it was normal to feel this way before a wedding. Alex forced a smile, but inside, he was a whirlwind of emotions. As the ceremony time approached, the church filled up. Jessica's family occupied the front rows, all smiling and excited. Jessica's mother couldn't hold back tears of joy. The priest took his place at the altar and the music began. Everyone turned towards the church entrance, waiting to see the bride, but as minutes passed, Jessica did not appear. Guests started to whisper, wondering what might be happening. In the room where Alex should have been preparing, only a hastily written note was found. I can't do this. I am sorry. Alex's best man ran out to search for him desperately, but he had already disappeared. The news hit Jessica like a cold shower. She collapsed to the floor, her white dress spreading around her like a pool of milk. Her bridesmaids tried to console her, but she was in shock, unable to process what was happening. In the church, the murmurs grew louder. Jessica's father, filled with anger and shame, stood up to announce that the wedding was off. The guests were stunned, some expressing outrage, others offering words of comfort to the bride's family. In the days that followed, Alex remained missing. Jessica stayed home, refusing to see or speak to anyone. When Alex finally reappeared almost a week later, his explanation seemed weak and selfish. He was afraid of commitment, not ready for Jessica. His words only intensified the pain of rejection. Jessica vowed never to let Alex back into her life. Heartbroken but determined, she decided it was time to focus on herself and her career, leaving behind dreams of a future with the man who had abandoned her at the altar. Over the years following the wedding disaster, Jessica immersed herself in her legal career, spending long hours at the office studying cases, preparing arguments, and honing her skills. Her colleagues noticed her extraordinary dedication and her ability to analyze complex problems with clarity and precision. As she gained experience, Jessica began to stand out in challenging cases, developing a reputation for her impeccable ethics and her ability to navigate complicated legal situations. Her superiors were impressed with her determination and intelligence. At 32, Jessica was promoted to junior partner at her law firm. She celebrated the achievement with a small dinner, joined only by her parents and a few close friends. Although she smiled and accepted congratulations, there was a shadow in her eyes, a silent reminder of the pain she still carried. 3 years later, at 35, Jessica received news that would change her life. She had been appointed as a judge. The swearing-in ceremony was a moment of great pride for her and her family. As she donned the judge's robe for the first time, Jessica felt the weight of responsibility but also a sense of achievement she had never experienced before. As a judge, Jessica quickly earned the respect of her peers and the lawyers who appeared in her courtroom. She was known for her impartiality, attention to detail, and her ability to see beyond appearances and get to the core of each case. However, despite all her professional success, Jessica still struggled in her personal life, finding it hard to trust people, especially in romantic matters. Some friends tried to introduce her to interesting men, but she always found an excuse to avoid involvement. At night, alone in her apartment, Jessica sometimes found herself thinking about what might have been, but she quickly dismissed those thoughts, focusing on her future goals. She had built a life of respect and success on her own, and that was something no one could take away from her. Over time, Jessica learned to find satisfaction in her independence. She had become a strong, respected, and successful woman. Though the scars of the past were still there, they had become part of who she was, reminding her of her strength and resilience. 8 years after the church incident, Alex, now 38, was in a different phase of his life. He had built a stable career as a sales manager in a tech company, but his personal life remained somewhat chaotic. It was at a product launch party that he met Karen, a vivacious 32-year-old woman working in the marketing department. Karen was lively and outgoing, the opposite of Alex in many ways. She made him laugh and brought him out of his comfort zone. Alex was instantly attracted to her, and the two began seeing each other frequently. Weeks turned into months, and Alex found himself increasingly involved. 3 months after starting their relationship, during a romantic dinner, Alex surprised everyone, including himself, by proposing to Karen. He was determined to prove mainly to himself that he had overcome his fears of commitment. Karen, delighted by the romantic gesture and in love with Alex, accepted without hesitation. The wedding preparations were swift and hectic. Karen wanted a grand ceremony, and Alex agreed to everything, eager to show the world he had changed. In just 2 months, they organized a lavish party at a 5-star hotel. On the wedding day, Alex felt a knot in his stomach, but he attributed it to normal groom's anxiety. He took a deep breath and moved forward. The ceremony was beautiful. Karen was radiant in her white dress, and Alex smiled for the cameras, feeling proud to have made it this far. The honeymoon was a 2-week trip to Europe. At first, everything seemed perfect. They visited museums, dined in exquisite restaurants, and took photos in front of famous monuments. But as days passed, small irritations began to emerge. Alex found Karen a bit controlling, always wanting to decide what they would do next. Karen, on the other hand, got frustrated with Alex's passivity. Back home, the reality of everyday life began to settle in. Alex realized that in his rush to get married, they had not really talked about important things like finances, future plans, or even simple day-to-day preferences. Differences that had once seemed charming now began to cause friction. Karen wanted to go out and socialize constantly, while Alex preferred quiet nights at home. They disagreed on how to spend money, how often they should visit families, and even on home decor. Small disagreements began to turn into more serious arguments. Alex began to feel suffocated, exactly what he feared would happen in a marriage. He found himself wondering if he had made another mistake. He had jumped into something without being truly ready. The weight of his impulsive decisions began to pile up, and Alex didn't know how to deal with it. As months passed, Alex and Karen's marriage deteriorated rapidly. What started as small irritations soon turned into more serious issues. Karen, who initially admired Alex's calm nature, now saw him as apathetic and disinterested. She constantly pushed him to be more proactive, to make more decisions, to get more involved in their life as a couple. Alex, on the other hand, felt suffocated by Karen's expectations. He began spending more time at work, coming home later and later. When he was home, he often took refuge in his office, claiming he had work to do. In reality, he was avoiding the inevitable arguments that seemed to arise whenever he and Karen were in the same space. The fights became more frequent and intense. What started as a simple disagreement about what color to choose or where to dine quickly escalated to accusations of lack of consideration and love. Karen accused Alex of not trying hard enough in the marriage, while Alex countered by saying that Karen was controlling and never satisfied. The tension was palpable in the house, even in moments of silence. There was a heavy atmosphere between them. Friends and family began to notice that something was wrong. On the few occasions they went out together, Alex and Karen barely spoke to each other, each lost in their own thoughts and frustrations. Karen, feeling increasingly distant from Alex, began to become suspicious. She checked his phone when she could, questioning where he was and who he was talking to. Her insecurity fueled even more conflicts between them. Alex felt constantly scrutinized, which made him retreat even more. Nights turned into a silent battlefield. They slept back to back, the space between them and bed seeming like an insurmountable abyss. Conversations, when they occurred, were superficial and tense, both avoiding deeper topics for fear of starting another fight. After a year of marriage, it became clear to both that they had made a mistake. The love and passion that had led them to the altar had turned into resentment and bitterness. They were two people living separate lives under the same roof, united only by a piece of paper and promises that now seemed empty. Alex began to seriously think about divorce. He felt trapped, reliving the same fears that had made him run years ago. Karen, for her part, oscillated between anger at the situation and sadness at the failure of her marriage. Both knew that something had to change, but neither knew how to take the first step. The marriage that started with so much promise and expectation was falling apart, leaving Alex and Karen adrift, facing the harsh reality that sometimes love is not enough, especially when it is built on unstable foundations and impulsive decisions. After months of conflict and unhappiness, Alex finally made the decision to ask for a divorce. One Sunday morning, while Karen was still asleep, he sat at the kitchen table and wrote a list of reasons why the marriage was not working. Looking at the paper, he felt a mix of sadness and relief. When Karen woke up, Alex asked to talk. With a trembling voice, he explained that he believed it was better to separate. Karen, although not completely surprised, was devastated. She cried, screamed, and begged to try one more time, but Alex was determined. He knew that continuing in that relationship would only bring more pain for both. In the following days, the atmosphere in the house was heavy. Karen alternated between moments of anger and deep sadness. Alex, feeling guilty but relieved, began looking for a lawyer to start the divorce process. He wanted everything to be resolved quickly and amicably. Alex scheduled an appointment with a lawyer recommended by a co-worker. The lawyer explained the process, the necessary documents, and the possible scenarios. Alex listened attentively, taking notes and thinking that this time he was doing the right thing by facing his problems head-on. With the divorce papers prepared, Alex headed to the courthouse to file the process. He felt nervous as he climbed the stairs of the imposing building, remembering how his life had changed in recent years. While waiting in line to submit the documents, he tried to convince himself that he was doing the right thing. Finally, it was his turn. Alex handed over the papers to the clerk, who quickly examined them before informing him of the date of the first hearing. He nodded, took the receipt, and turned to leave, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. That's when the unexpected happened. As he left the room, Alex stumbled into someone. Looking up to apologize, his heart stopped. There in front of him was Jessica, wearing a judge's robe and looking at him with an expression of surprise and recognition. For a moment, neither spoke. Time seemed to freeze as they looked at each other, years of unspoken history passing between them in seconds. Alex's throat went dry. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Jessica was the first to recover, greeting him with a cold, "Good morning, sir," before quickly walking past him, her heels echoing in the marble corridor. Stunned, Alex left the courthouse, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. He couldn't believe the coincidence. Jessica, the woman he had abandoned at the altar years ago, was now a judge in the same courthouse where he was starting his divorce. In the days that followed, Alex couldn't stop thinking about the encounter. He wondered if Jessica would be involved in his case in some way. The idea left him anxious and a bit apprehensive. When the day of the first hearing arrived, Alex was nervous. He adjusted his tie several times before entering entering the courtroom. Karen was already there with her lawyer, avoiding looking at Alex. The officer announced the judge's entrance, and Alex's heart raced. To his surprise and disbelief, it was Jessica who walked into the room, dressed in her black robe with a serious and professional expression. She sat down, looked at the papers in front of her, and then raised her eyes, meeting Alex's gaze. In that moment, Alex felt as if the air had been sucked out of the room. He could barely concentrate as the hearing began. Jessica conducted the proceedings with calm and professionalism, giving no sign that she knew Alex beyond what was in the documents in front of her. When the hearing ended, Alex left the room feeling dizzy. He knew the upcoming weeks would be difficult. Not only would he have to deal with the end of his marriage, but he would also face his past in the form of the woman he had deeply hurt. As he walked out of the courthouse, Alex wondered if the universe was playing a cruel joke on him or giving him a chance for redemption. He didn't know what to expect from the upcoming hearings, but he was sure of one thing. His divorce had just become much more complicated than he could have imagined. When Jessica saw Alex in her courtroom, it felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. For a moment, she was transported back to that fateful day, dressed as a bride, waiting for a man who never appeared. But years of training and professionalism quickly took over, and she managed to maintain her exterior composure. In the days that followed the first hearing, Jessica struggled internally with a whirlwind of emotions: anger, pain, confusion, and even a touch of curiosity about Alex's current life tormented her. She spent sleepless nights tossing and turning in bed, questioning whether she would be able to judge the case impartially. One morning, Jessica arrived early at the courthouse and locked herself in her office. She took out the Judicial Ethics Code and reread it carefully, seeking guidance. The words impartiality and integrity jumped off the page, reminding her of her sacred duty as a judge. Jessica seriously considered recusing herself from judging the case, even drafting a formal document explaining the situation, but something prevented her from signing it. An inner voice told her that this was an opportunity to prove to herself that she had completely overcome the past. She decided to consult anonymously with a more experienced colleague, without revealing names or specific details. Jessica outlined the situation, and the advice she received was clear. If she believed she could judge the case fairly, then she should proceed. Stepping aside could be seen as an admission of weakness or bias. With that guidance in mind, Jessica made her decision. She would treat Alex's case exactly like any other. There would be no favoritism or revenge, only the impartial application of the law. She promised herself that she would keep her personal feelings completely separate from her professional decisions. However, maintaining that separation proved to be more difficult than Jessica imagined. Every time Alex entered her courtroom, she felt a knot in her chest. Memories of the past invaded her mind at the most inopportune moments. She had to constantly remind herself of her role and responsibility. Outside the courtroom, Jessica struggled not to think about the case. She found herself imagining what her life would have been like if Alex had not abandoned her. Would she be happy? Would she have become a judge? These questions haunted her, but she pushed them aside, focusing on her work and her professional ethics. As the process advanced, Jessica found strength in her determination to overcome this situation. Every decision she made was carefully considered, every word in her statements chosen with precision. She was determined to conduct this case with the same excellence she applied to all others. For Jessica, this case became more than just another divorce in her career. It was a test of her professional integrity, her ability to separate the personal from the professional, and, in a way, closure for her own unresolved past with Alex. As the divorce process unfolded, Alex found himself in a period of intense self-reflection. The incisive questions Jessica asked during the hearings and Karen's accusations forced him to confront truths about himself that he had ignored for years. One evening, after a particularly difficult hearing, Alex sat in his temporary apartment, a glass of water untouched in front of him. He took out a notebook and began to write, letting his thoughts flow freely. As the words filled the pages, he began to see a clear pattern in his life, a constant tendency to flee from commitments and responsibilities. Alex remembered the day he left Jessica at the altar. At that moment, he had convinced himself that he was doing the right thing, that he was saving them both from an unhappy marriage. Now, years later, he realized how selfish and cowardly he had been. That decision had not considered Jessica's feelings or the impact his actions would have on her. His rushed marriage to Karen emerged as a poorly conceived attempt to prove that he had overcome his fears. But in reality, he had never faced those fears head-on. Instead, he had jumped into another commitment without being truly prepared, repeating the cycle of fleeing when things got tough. The therapy sessions Alex had begun were helping him understand the roots of his behavior. He discovered that part of his fear of commitment stemmed from deeply ingrained insecurities and a constant need for external approval. He always feared not being good enough, and so he ran before anyone could reject him. As he gained this understanding about himself, Alex began to feel a mix of shame and determination. Shame for the harm he had caused Jessica and Karen, and determination to finally make real changes in his life. He began practicing small acts of responsibility and commitment in his daily life, meeting deadlines at work, keeping promises made to friends, and even regularly taking care of a plant. Each small action was a step toward the man he wanted to become. During one of the final hearings, when Jessica asked a particularly sharp question about his motivations, Alex surprised everyone, including himself, with his honesty. "I did what I did because I was afraid," he admitted, his voice trembling slightly. "Afraid of failing, afraid of not being enough. But now I understand that running away was the biggest failure of all." This public admission seemed to mark a turning point for Alex. He felt as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders, although he knew the road ahead would still be long and difficult. He was finally facing his demons head-on. At night, Alex looked out the window of his apartment, reflecting on everything he had learned. He knew he couldn't change the past, but he was determined to use these lessons to shape a better future. For the first time in a long time, he felt hopeful, not because of someone or something external, but because of the change that was happening within him. After weeks of tense hearings and emotional revelations, the divorce process between Alex and Karen finally came to a conclusion. The courtroom was silent and charged with expectation. When Judge Jessica entered to give her final decision, Jessica sat down, adjusted her papers, and looked around the room. Her face betrayed no emotion. When she began to speak, her voice was clear and firm. "After careful consideration of all the evidence presented and the testimonies heard, this court has reached a decision on the divorce case between Alex Guzman and Karen Ramirez," she began. She continued detailing the terms of the divorce. The division of assets was done equitably, taking into account the contributions of both parties during the marriage. Karen received the couple's house while Alex kept the investments they had made together. Regarding financial matters, Jessica determined that Alex should pay temporary alimony to Karen for a period of 2 years to help her reestablish herself professionally. This court recognizes that Mrs. Ramirez made sacrifices in her career for the marriage, and this compensation seeks to provide a fair transition. Jessica explained the decision on the custody of the couple's dog, which had become a point of contention, was resolved with a shared custody agreement and a detailed visitation schedule. Throughout her exposition, Jessica maintained a neutral and professional tone. However, when she reached the final part of her decision, her voice took on a firmer tone. This court observes that both parties demonstrated faults during the marriage. Guzman showed a tendency to avoid responsibilities, while Mrs. Ramirez sometimes acted impulsively with the couple's finances. These observations had been taken into account in the final decision. Alex, sitting in his chair, felt the weight of Jessica's words. He knew the terms were not entirely favorable to him, but he recognized the justice in the decision. Karen, on the other hand, seemed a mix of relief and disappointment. When Jessica finished reading the decision, she looked directly at Alex and Karen. This court hopes that both parties can learn from this experience and move forward in a positive manner. The divorce is granted. This session is closed. With a gavel strike, Alex and Karen's marriage officially came to an end. After the hearing, Alex remained seated for a moment, absorbing everything that had happened. He looked at Jessica, who was organizing her papers, and felt a mix of gratitude and regret. Although the terms were not ideal for him, he recognized the fairness with which she had conducted the case. Jessica, for her part, felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She had navigated through this complicated case, keeping her professional integrity intact. As she left the courtroom, she felt a sense of closure, not just for the case but also for her own past with Alex. Weeks after the divorce was finalized, Alex stood outside the courthouse gathering courage. He had asked for one last conversation with Jessica, not as a judge, but as the person he had hurt years ago. To his surprise, after several polite and persistent requests, Jessica finally agreed to meet him at a nearby cafe. When Alex entered the cafe, he saw Jessica already sitting at a table in the corner. She looked different outside her judge's robe, more relaxed but still maintaining a reserved posture. Alex approached, his heart racing. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me," Alex said, sitting down. Jessica nodded silently, her eyes watching him intently. Alex took a deep breath and began, "Jessica, I know that nothing I say can undo what happened, but I need you to know how sorry I am. What I did leaving you that day was the most cowardly and selfish thing I've ever done." He continued, his voice trembling slightly. "I've spent years running from myself, from my fears, from my responsibilities. But this divorce process, seeing you again, has made me face who I really am and who I want to be." Jessica listened in silence, her face a mask of calm. When Alex paused, she spoke for the first time. "Why are you telling me this now?" she asked. "Because I finally understood the harm I caused," he replied. "I'm not here asking for a second chance, nor hoping that we can be friends. I just want you to know that I recognize my mistakes and that I'm truly sorry." A silence settled between them. Jessica looked out the cafe window for a moment as if organizing her thoughts. When she turned back to Alex, there was a softness in her eyes that he hadn't seen in years. "Alex," she began, "what you did hurt me deeply. It took me a long time to get over and rebuild my life. But hearing you now, seeing your sincerity, that means something to me." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "I forgive you, not for your sake, but for mine. Carrying this resentment no longer serves me." Alex felt tears in his eyes, a mix of relief and gratitude overwhelming him. "Thank you," he said simply. Jessica stood up, ready to leave. "I hope you use the experience to become a better person, Alex. Good luck." As Jessica left the cafe, Alex remained seated, reflecting on everything that had happened. He knew he had a long road ahead, but for the first time in years, he felt truly at peace. In the months that followed, Alex immersed himself in his work of self-improvement. He continued with therapy, began doing volunteer work, and made an effort to be more present in the lives of his friends and family. Jessica, for her part, felt liberated after that last conversation. She continued her career as a judge with renewed passion, knowing she had overcome one of the biggest personal and professional challenges of her life. Both followed separate paths, transformed by the experience. Alex learned the value of honesty and commitment, while Jessica affirmed her strength and integrity. Although their lives would never intersect again, both carried with them the lessons learned, using them to shape a brighter and more authentic future. And so, friends, did you like the story? What do you think about Jessica's decision to judge the case even knowing Alex? What would you have done in her place? Thank you very much for watching the video. I sincerely hope you enjoyed the story. Let us know in the comments where you were listening from today. I'm sure the next video appearing on your screen will also move you. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, give it a like, and activate the notification bell so you don't miss our upcoming videos. A big kiss and see you in the next story.